right, so again, today what we're going to do is we're doing part 2 of our series that I began last week, and the series is called Resilient, When Life Knocks You Down. And we're talking about how in life we get knocked down by all these different things. And there's different things that come into our life that can either let us down or knock us down. And we've been using the analogy of boxing, right? In boxing, there are lots of punches that can knock you down. You have a jab, a hook, a cross, an uppercut, right? The uppercut's the big one, right? And so all these punches can knock you down in boxing. Well, there are a lot of different things that can knock us down in life. And so last week we looked at one punch that can come our way that can knock us down, and that is when the world knocks us down. And last week so we talked about this, how why bad things happen in our life. Because that's often a question that people have is, hey, if God is so good, then why do bad things happen? And so we explained that last week. If you were not here last week, it's on our YouTube channel. It's on our Facebook page. I encourage you to go back and look at that. It's on our website. You can see why bad things happen in our world. And we see that God's not to blame. If anything, God is still there with us and for us, helping us through the storm. We went back to the very beginning and saw that it all got messed up when people rebelled against God. And even though God doesn't owe us anything, we have a heavenly Father that's there with us every step of the way, and he makes us a promise that he will walk with us through the storms in life. And so we talked about that last week. What do we do when life knocks you down? Now today we're going to look at the next punch that comes our way and can knock us down, and that is this: when people knock you down. When other people's bad choices can knock you down. Every single person has been affected by someone else's bad choices. Every single person has had hurts in their life, has had things that have just knocked them down, betrayals, where someone turned their back on you. Maybe somebody said something about you. Now they don't even have to tell you to your face. You know what they'll do is they'll jump on social media, right? And they'll do it kind of sly. Some people do it sly. They jump on social media and they don't say your name, but they say the whole situation, and you're like, oh, I know what's up with that, right? And so people will do this. They will let you down. But not only do they let us down, but you know that last time I checked, we are all people. And so what that means is that there are times when we will let other people down. Every single one of us, we can come up here and share a story when we've let someone down. When we hurt someone, we said something we shouldn't have said, where we regretted something that we have done. Why? Because we're human, we're flawed. So we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have things happen in our life. And sometimes people think that if you're a Christian that you're never going to have issues or problems, that every relationship is going to be perfect, but that's just not true. Because if you go back and you study and you see the Gospels, that Jesus, no one walked in this face of the earth perfect but Jesus. Jesus was perfect, and yet Jesus, he was betrayed, he was denied, he was persecuted, he was hit, he was spit on, crown of thorns. I mean, and this is all by people. And Jesus tells us that if it happened to him, persecution happened to him, that it will happen to us. That as Christians, there will be times in your life when you're doing the right thing, you're striving to do the right thing, and other people aren't going to like it. I still remember when I first gave my life to Jesus. That was 24 years ago. And I said, Jesus, I'm all in. And when I did, I had some old friends that didn't like that, because they still wanted me to party and go and do that old life. And I was like, you know what? When I gave my life to God, I started doing the right thing. And I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. And it's not because I'm trying to earn God's love. It's because I've actually now for the first time understand God's love. I'm not trying to work for God's love. He already gave it to me. And so when God loves me unconditionally and I understood the sacrifice that he paid for me, man, I just wanted to do the right thing. And so I told these friends, I'm like, hey, I don't do that anymore. And I remember they got mad at me. They turned their back on me. That's just going to be a part of life sometimes, that some people just aren't going to like it. And so we're going to go through it. But today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the life of Joseph. Now Joseph in the Old Testament, this guy was incredible. This is a guy who was knocked down in extreme ways by other people, by some of the people that were closest to him. Extreme ways that you and I will never be knocked down in our life. And I'm going to show you that today. And this guy who got knocked down in extreme ways, he got up every time. And so we're going to learn from him how to get up when this happens. Because here's one thing we also learn from Joseph, that he shows us that you can't control someone else's behavior, but you can control your response to the situation. Have you noticed? You can't control other people. I wish we could. There are times when I see somebody making dumb mistakes, dumb choices, I'm like, man, you don't deserve free will. I'm going to take that, put it in my pocket, right? You just can't make choices, so we're going to make them for you right now. But people will do this. They will make bad choices, but here's one thing we know, and he shows us that you can't control what they do, but you can control your response to that situation. And so today we're going to look at his life, And we're going to start right now with a text of where it all began. Where it all began with him when things started to go downhill in his life. And it wasn't even his doing when things started going downhill. Listen to what it says here in Genesis chapter 37, verse 4. It says, but his brothers hated Joseph. Why? Was it because something he did? Nope. Because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. I mean, that's messed up. They hated Joseph because they had resentment towards their father. Like Jacob actually favored Joseph. He actually was the favorite. He bought him a coat of many colors, if you heard the story. And he did. He spoiled him a little bit. And the reason for that, if you read just before this, it says that because in his older age, he had a son. And he didn't think he was going to have any more sons. So he has a son in his older age. And now he's like, hey, I'm going to spoil him. It's like that last child always gets more spoiled than the rest of them, right? And so that's what he's doing. He's like, hey. And so he favored him. And the brothers resented him for it. But when you really step back and look at the story, you see that all the brothers were doing is they were just seeking love. They were just seeking acceptance from their father. It's like they wanted to have this relationship with their dad. They saw the way that their dad looked at their younger brother and were like, man, I wish my dad loved me that way. And so they wanted to have that relationship. And because they were let down, see, before they knocked down Joseph, they were let down by their father. And unfortunately, that's what happens. One thing that we learn about people is this, is that hurt people hurt people. When people are hurting, they will hurt other people. That's usually where it comes from. It comes from a deeper hurt that has happened in their life that now they hurt others. You know, when I'm hurting, it's the easiest time for me to lash out. When I'm in a great mood, you don't ever lash out. But it's when you're struggling with something, when you're hurting, you're stressed out, that's when it's easier to lash out. Now, I want you to know something. That does not mean that it justifies that behavior. So if somebody's hurting, if something's happened in their life and now they're going to hurt someone else, it doesn't justify, it doesn't mean it's okay, because all that does is just continues to create this effect that just keeps going on. So it doesn't justify, but it does at least identify. And if you identify where the hurt began, now you're able to put the right things in place to actually go and fix it. And so where did it begin with his brothers? It began with jealousy. It began with pride. They were angry at their father, and because of that, they're going to take it out on their brother. And so what did they do? Man, what they did was horrific. Things that you and I would not go through. Listen to what it says here in Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 23. Here's what they did. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. What? I want you to see this. Okay, so the brother goes, hey, what are we going to gain by killing him? Like, they were mad at their father, and now they were angry at him. And granted, Joseph didn't make it easy on himself. He tells them about a dream that he has, pretty much saying that they're going to bow down before him. And so they're like, oh, really? We're going to take you out, boy? And so there was some stuff that happened, and they're going to kill him. Like, literally, his brothers were going to set out to kill him. And the other brother goes, hey, I don't think we should kill him. These guys, just did not write like Hallmark cards, right? I mean, these aren't guys that you want for inspirational stuff. Like, hey, let's not kill him. Let's sell him into slavery. But here's what happened. Judah, his brother, the reason he said this was actually to spare his life. This was actually out of mercy. He didn't want to hurt him. He didn't want to kill him. Was he mad? Yes. But he's like, I don't want to kill my brother. So he's like, hey, and his other brothers were plotting it. They were actually going to do it. And he's like, hey, instead, let's do this. He did it to spare his life. Now, why did this all happen? Here's why. Because they were acting on emotion. They were acting on anger, frustration. I bet if I had a mic up here and said, hey, let's all come up here and we're going to share, have we ever done anything that we regretted in anger, frustration, in the wrong emotion? All of us would go, yes, absolutely. Don't worry, we're not going to do that. We'd all say, absolutely. We'd all have stories, not a story. We'd have stories of things that we regret. I got to tell you, the biggest things I regret in my life are things that I did in anger. And I think all of us can come up here and share that. Here's the one thing I found about emotion, okay? Emotion is a great passenger, but never let it be the driver. It's a terrible driver. If you allow emotion to drive your life, what ends up happening is it's up and down. I mean, you can have good days and bad days, and it'll be erratic. And so you have to be careful about that, not to let emotion, it's okay to have it come along, and it's great to have it in the car, but be careful that we don't let it steer our life, because when it does, we will leave a trail of hurt along the way. And that's exactly what happened here with Joseph's brother. And so they end up hurting Joseph. And so Joseph, in this situation, he had every reason to stay down. I mean, literally, he got beat up, thrown into a pit. They go, hey, let's not kill him. Let's sell him into slavery. They sell him. So now he's in this caravan being taken away as a slave. How do you get back up from that? How do you keep moving forward? How do you stay positive? So today we're going to learn from Joseph three things that we can apply when we get knocked down by people. And the first thing is this, is don't let others affect your integrity. Don't let others affect who you are. I mean, Joseph, in this situation, and I want you to know, the people that hurt him the most, the deepest, were the people closest to him. Isn't that how it works, though? I mean, think about it. Those are the ones that hurt the deepest, the people that are closest to you. I mean, if I have someone who doesn't know me say something negative about me, I'm like, yeah, whatever, right? But if you have somebody who's close to you turn their back on you, man, that hurts deep. And so in this situation, he's now sold into slavery. He's on this caravan, and it wasn't the only selling that happened of him. Listen to what happens here in verse 36. It says this, meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, so they sold him to them. They took off. Where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, he got sold again, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. So now he's a slave. So now he went from being a son to being beat up, thrown into a pit, sold to these traders, being taken over, and now he's a slave for Potiphar, the captain of the palace guard. He literally was stripped completely of everything he had, stripped of his freedom. Physically speaking, he had nothing, but yet he kept his integrity. He stepped back and said, look, I can't control what they do, but I can control how I respond to it. And if you go back and you study what took place between chapters 37 and 39, you see it's incredible. He stays focused on God. He keeps doing the right thing. While he's a slave for Potiphar, he works with his integrity. He works as if he's working for God, not for man. And so he's like, hey, I'm going to do the right thing regardless of the situation. So he goes there, and Potiphar sees it. And Potiphar sees that God keeps blessing him in everything that he's doing. So Potiphar goes, hey, if God is blessing him, that means he's blessing me because he's my slave. Therefore, Potiphar puts him in charge of everything. Like literally everything that he owned, he becomes in charge of it. And you think, there it is. He's back on top. I mean, yes, he's a slave, but now he's in charge of everything that is Potiphar's. I mean, he's second to Potiphar now, the guy who was captain of the palace guard. And so you think, okay, that's where he's going to stay now. And then he got hit again. Listen to what happens here in chapter 39, starting in verse 7. It says this. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. If you read just before this text, it says that he was a young stud, all built. So she looks at him and says, how you doing, right? And then she said this, come and sleep with me, she demanded. But Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He's worked his way up. He has held back nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against, not Potiphar, against God. He says, you know what? How people treat me doesn't affect my relationship with God. Yes, people let me down, but my God hasn't let me down. He's like, and I will not sin against God. My integrity, who I am, my character is not based on my physical situation, but it's based on who I am in God. And because of that, it's going to determine how I'm going to respond to all these other things that are happening here. And I want you to know that he could have done this. In a cultural perspective, if you study Egyptian culture, you see that adultery wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, they did it. As long as you handled it discreetly, as long as you weren't, getting a big old banner, right? If you weren't telling a lot of people. But if you handled it discreetly, they're like, okay, whatever. It wasn't that big of a deal. But he's like, culture doesn't dictate my morality. My God dictates my morality. He's like, that is where my integrity is. He's like, I'm going to follow my God-given conviction. And so you would think, you're like, yes, what a hero. That's awesome. He's like, I can't do this. I'm not going to sin against God. And you would think that Potiphar's wife would go, wow, such character, such integrity. You're a stud. We're going to promote you even more because you're so good. Nope. So what does she do? She lies and says that he tries to rape her, calls in the guard. Potiphar believes her, throws him into prison. Now he's in prison. He went from being beat up, sold, a slave for some time, worked his way up, and now he's in prison, in a dungeon. And while he's there, you would think he'd be like, you know what, that's it. It's over. I mean, I thought rock bottom was being a slave. Now I'm even lower than that. He's like, at that point, I know for myself, I'd be like this. I'd be like, this is crazy. And what does he do while he's there? Instead of giving up, it says that he continued to help the other prisoners. That he encouraged them, he helped them. That they would have, one of them had a dream, and he's like, hell, here, let me help you interpret your dream. And he was helping them. He said all the guards heard all this. He was doing all kinds of incredible things, through it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Why? Because people's behavior wasn't going to dictate his integrity. He said, my foundation is God. My foundation is God. It literally led him to be the second most powerful man in the world. I'll show you here in a minute how that happened. But here's one thing that we see. Think about this. His brothers beat him up, and yet he served Potiphar with everything he had. Then Potiphar's wife lies. He then gets thrown into prison, and he goes there and he helps the prisoners and the guards. After that, he gets forgotten by one of the prisoners. He then goes and starts helping Pharaoh. At every point, the one thing he did not do, he did not carry the pain from a previous relationship into the next relationship. Did you notice that? He didn't go over to Potiphar and go, I'm not going to do anything. Man, I had a coat of many colors before. I was my dad's spoiled child. I had everything I wanted. No, I'm not going to do anything. Potiphar, you're nothing to me. I mean, he did not carry it into the next relationship. He's like, hey, it is what it is. I'm going to have to now deal. Here's my current situation, and I'm not going to carry this on. Let me tell you, one of the biggest mistakes that we make as people is we carry baggage from other relationships or other past pain into our current relationships. It's amazing. I've talked to people whose marriages, they're falling apart, and it's not because of a current thing that's happening. They're hanging on to something that happened like 10 years ago. I've even talked to people that their marriage is falling apart, and it was nothing that their spouse has done, but it's because of something that happened to them as a child and that they just never dealt with. And now they can't forgive. And now they can't move on. And because of that, they carry that type of heart into the marriage, and they're trying to figure it out. Listen, we've got to learn to not have someone else be accountable for what they did not do. And so that's not what he did. He's like, hey, Potiphar didn't do this to me. And then while he's in prison, he's like, these people didn't do this to me. So he dealt with them in a specific way. It was just about them and the relationship he had with them. Didn't carry out anything else into it. And then, but the main reason that he was able to do it is because he trusted God, which is the next thing there on your notes. If you're going to turn over your notes, we got to trust God to work it out. He was not going to allow the things that people did to affect his view of God. See, he knew something. He knew that people were flaky and people will let you down, but God will never let them down. And luckily he did know that, because if you think about it, he could have thought God let me down. He could have thought that. Wait a second. So I was back home with God's people. I was being taken care of by my father. Everything was going great. And as I'm following God, my brothers beat me up. I get sold into slavery. I get then put in prison. He could have at that point said, you know what, God? You let me down. So now I'm going to start looking at this culture, this Egyptian culture. Let's look at all these other false gods that are out there. Because you can pick your flavor. It's like whatever I want to do, I can just pick another false god, and I'll just do that. But he never turned his back on God. Why? Because he knew God. He knew his integrity. He knew that God will never leave him, will never forsake him. He knew that it wasn't God doing this. It was people did this. He's like, look, I know it's not God. God isn't the one that did this. Through their free will, they chose wrong, and they chose to hurt me. And so instead of drawing further away from God, he drew closer to God through the problems and the persecution. And because he drew closer to God, he actually ended up fulfilling his God-given purpose. He fulfilled God's will for his life. And we have God's will. Every single one of us has God's will in our life. God has a purpose that he has for us. And the number one purpose that he has for us is, number one, is to be in a loving relationship with God. Every single one of us, we're always looking at God's purpose as an accomplishment, like, hey, something that we're going to get later on. And God helps us, and he does help us along the way. But the thing is this, is the number one reason that we're alive, the number one reason that God created every single one of us is not for something in the future, it's for right now. For right now, he says, I just want to be in a loving relationship with you. You know that every single one of us was made to be loved by God. We were created by God and for God. And so that's why when we don't have a relationship with God, why there's an emptiness inside of us and we're trying to fill it with all this other stuff. I know, I was there. I tried everything to fill that void when I didn't have God in my life. And every single time it left me empty. And then when I gave my life to God, I realized that now that's what it means when Jesus says, I came to give you life and that you might live it to the full. God completes our life. And so that's what he knew. He's like, God is always right there. And so he stayed strong. And the outcome would blow your mind. He literally became the second most powerful man in the known world. Because while he was in prison, he was there, and some of the other prisoners were Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. And so they had some dreams. And so he goes, hey, let me interpret the dreams for you. So then he interprets the dreams, and he goes, but when you leave out of here, and you're before Pharaoh, remember me, okay? And they're like, okay, yeah, I'll remember you. So they get called out of there, go back before Pharaoh. Guess what? They forgot him. I mean, that's messed up. So he spends years in there. I'm like, that's jacked. He helped them, and as soon as they got out, they're like, see ya, and they left him. And so now they're there, and then Pharaoh, years later, has another dream. And as he has this other dream, he's like trying to get answers, and somebody goes, hey, there was a guy some time back in prison. We should see if he's still there. Yes, he's still there. You know why? Because he's in prison. You don't just magically get out of prison. So he was back, he was over there. They said, let's call him over. So they called him over. He was able to interpret the dream. And then Pharaoh was like, hey, I want you to be with me. And so he then helps him. He's like, I want you to help me, with some things. They started helping him. He started climbing the corporate ladder in Egypt as well, to the point where he literally became the most trusted advisor to Pharaoh, the second most powerful man in the world. And think about it. Look at all the stuff that happened along the way. And then while he's the second most powerful man in the world, a famine hits the area. So, there's no rain, no food, and that affected the entire area. But Egypt was very wealthy, so he knew, so he prepared for it, and they started stockpiling a lot of food, a lot of grain. And so then as the famine hit, the areas were all affected, including the areas where his father and his brothers lived. And so now his father sends his brothers to go into Egypt and to go try to barter for food. Like, hey, let's trade some stuff for food. Now, remember, they don't know what's happened to Joseph. All they knew is they sold him into slavery when he was young. That's all they knew. They didn't know about Potiphar. They didn't know about prison. They don't know about now being the second most powerful man. So they go there, and they stand before Joseph, and they're saying, hey, can we trade for food? We got all this stuff that we want to trade. And so Joseph looks at them, and Joseph recognizes them. Now, they didn't recognize Joseph because, one, when they did this, he was a young boy. And so now he's a grown man. This is years later, and he's all in Egyptian attire, right? So he's all Egyptianed out, dressed in Egyptian attire, and he's looking at things. He's like, oh, my goodness, those are my brothers. And they're asking him for food. And as they're asking him for food, I got to tell you, to me, I would have been like, you're getting nothing from me. Luckily, Joseph has way better character than I do, I guess, right? But I got to tell you, here's his response to them. It was absolutely incredible. Listen to what it says here. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. He says, you guys meant this for evil, but God used it for good. That God did something incredible through this. I want you to know something, church. That God can take whatever people intend for evil in your life and he can use it for good. But it was based on his response to it. Because his faith didn't waver. He said, God, I'm strong no matter what. I'm not strong in me. I'm not strong in my own ability and my own strength. God, it's you because you're the foundation of my life. And what I love is this, is that Joseph was going to serve God wherever he was. See, we look at the end of the story and go, oh, yes, okay, I see. He served God, but then he ended up being the second most powerful man. That's what I want. I want God to give me that. But he never did this barter with God. This wasn't a transactional relationship with God, like, God, I'm going to stay faithful through this because I want to become the second most powerful man in the world. No, he was like, you know what, God, I'm faithful, period. If he would have stayed in Potiphar's house, he would have been faithful. If he would have stayed in prison, he would have been faithful. At every point, that's why it has to start with integrity. It has to start with our character. It has to start with our foundation and our relationship with God. And then we have faith that God is going to work it out. Listen to what it says here in Psalm 37. In verse 7, it says this. It says, be still in the presence of the Lord and wait patiently for him to act. He had to do that. You know why? He was there for years. Years. I mean, I can't go 5 minutes or 5 days going, come on, God, get me out of this situation. God's like, man, Joseph waited for years. Says, don't worry about evil people who prosper or fret about their wicked schemes. It's like, hey, don't worry about what they're doing. You can't control their behavior, but you can control your response. And know this. It says, God says, wait patiently for me. Trust in him. That there is called genuine faith. Genuine faith. So now, that's what we can do, is don't let others affect our integrity. Keep trusting in God. Now I'm going to share with you the hardest thing to ever do when people knock you down. This is so difficult, I want you to know. But if we're able to grasp this, we're able to live it out, I promise you, it'll be life transforming. It will take the weight off of your shoulders so much so that you can walk in the freedom that God intended for us. And that's this. We have to learn to walk in forgiveness. Walk in forgiveness. The quickest way to stay down when we've been knocked down is to harbor anger, hurt, and resentment. We'll stay down. Or to seek vengeance yourself, like, man, no, I'm not going to forgive them till they get what they deserve. I got to tell you, and people tell me this, like, well, Pastor, it's easy for you to say because you're a pastor. No. This is not something that I do well naturally. God has changed that in my heart and in my life. Now when people wrong me, I'm like, okay, I pray and I let it go. But I got to tell you, this is not something I do naturally. I used to be a very resentful person. Hey, if you burned a bridge, I never want to rebuild it. I'm like, hey, maybe there was a reason that we shouldn't have that relationship. I would not forgive anyone for anything. I mean, I would. I was just like, you know what? Then this relationship just, what wasn't meant to last. And so I did that because of pain in my past. And so I thought I was defending myself or protecting myself, right? So what I would do is I would build up these walls in my relationships. And as soon as someone did me wrong, I'd build up the wall. Or I'd stop the relationship. You know what that means? Is that if you do that, you'll never be able to have a deep, meaningful relationship. You never will, because you'll be stuck. You'll be stuck. And remember, people aren't perfect. So if you're married or if you're dating, you have communication with any other person, guess what? They're going to let you down sometimes. And so we have to learn to walk in forgiveness. So how do we get back up? How do we get back up? Is this. We allow God to provide justice. And we continue to walk in forgiveness. And that's what Joseph did. The reason Joseph was able to keep moving forward and not stay down is because he lived with this mindset. Listen to what happens here in Genesis chapter 50, starting in verse 18, it says this. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. You got to know, because he's like the most powerful guy now. And so now they're like, oh my goodness, what did we do? Look, we are your slaves, they said. But Joseph replied, you know what? You did this to me. I'm going to get your head cut off. I don't want to spend any time with you. Get away from me. He didn't say any of that. What did he say? Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? He says, I'm going to let God be God. And I'm going to let God deal with the punishment. I'm going to let God deal with the discipline. God deal with the justice. Because have you noticed, for us, we don't do justice very well. Like, revenge is not, it's not ever eye for an eye, what we do. Somebody pokes you in the eye, you're like, okay, their whole head's coming off. That's really what's happening, right? We don't do that very well. And so this says, hey, he says, look, I'm not God. I'm going to let God deal with you in that situation. So he walked with open-handed forgiveness. Now, please understand, forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. Too many times people believe that if you're forgiving someone, it means that now everything goes back to the way it was. No, I mean, there are times when the hurt is so bad that it's time to break that relationship, that you can forgive them, say, I'm not going to let that weigh down my heart anymore. I'm not going to keep it in my mind anymore. I'm going to walk away from this. I'm going to let God deal with them. But that doesn't mean they're going to come over and have barbecues at my house anymore. The relationship could be over. You could have that. But you walk with forgiveness. See, forgiveness is given, but trust is earned. Now, trust. Now, let me make sure I qualify that, okay? Trust is earned because people need to show themselves to be faithful. But I also want to be careful because sometimes people who have a heart of unforgiveness, you go, well, I don't trust them because they made a mistake. That used to be me. I used to be like, that's it. Look, see, they made a mistake. I don't trust them now. No. Every person makes mistakes. All of us. So don't use that. It's if they're showing a history or a pattern of doing the same thing in an area, then in that area, yes, you don't keep opening yourself for that pain. They need to show themselves to be faithful in that situation. But here's what we're doing. When we're saying, hey, as far as forgiveness, when we have lack of forgiveness, what we're saying is this, is I'm in control. I'm in control of their pain. I'm in control of their justice. I'm going to make them pay for it, which is wild because you know what? I heard somebody say this a long time ago. It was so great. They said, you having a heart of unforgiveness and expecting for them to feel it is like you drinking poison yourself and expecting them to die. It doesn't work. There have been times where I was so angry, so upset at what someone did to me, and they're on social media doing selfies. And I'm like, what? As if nothing ever happened. They weren't even bothered by it. And I realized that anger, who was hurting? Was myself. Was myself. And so I had to get to a point of saying, you know what, God? I'll let you handle that situation. I'm going to let you handle justice. Because when we grant forgiveness, that's what we're doing. We're saying, God, it's not that I'm forgetting, but I'm going to let you handle the justice. And I want you to know something. It's not like God's asking us for permission anyway. God's the one that's going to grant the justice anyway. He's the one that's in control of that anyway. But it reminds us that God's in control. So it's not like God's going, can I please have permission till I can provide justice? God's not waiting for us. He's already going to do it, but it reminds us that God is the one that does it. And so what it does, it doesn't let us harbor that. And I know what you're thinking. But what if they get away with it? That's the biggest thing. I still remember I used to hang on to that. No, because then they're going to get away with it. They're going to get away with it. And then I realized something. If you study Scripture, you see, no one gets away with anything with God. God is all-knowing. God knows all the wrong they have done to you, and he knows all the wrong that they've done that you don't even know about. So if they're not going to get away with it, God has that covered. So what we do is we trust God to handle that situation, and that's exactly what Joseph did. Joseph lived out what it says in Romans chapter 12, verse 19. Listen to this verse. This is an incredible verse. It says, never take your own revenge. So when should we take our own revenge? Never, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. God says, you let me handle it. Trust me, they're not going to like it when daddy gets home. There's spankings all over the place. But if your enemy is hungry, he says, here's what you should do. So as we trust God to provide the justice, the discipline, God says, here's what we do. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For in doing so, you will heap burning coals on their head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. You can't put out fire with gas. It says that if you want to put out a fire, you got to put water on it. Evil does not get rid of evil. You want to overcome evil, you overcome it by doing good, doing the right thing. And he says there, and Joseph lived this out. It says, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. There was a famine. Why did his brothers come? To get food. He literally gave them food, gave them supplies, gave them what they needed to live. And then it said in the text is that, look, that by doing so, you're going to heap burning coals on their head. You're going to make them feel conviction. That they're going to think, man, what did I do? Listen, if someone wrongs you and you do wrong, in their mind, they're now justified. Like, that's what I thought. But if they wronged you and you do right, you let God deal with the conviction, and it's going to eat at them. It's going to eat at them. And so that's what it's saying is let that eat up. Don't let it weigh you down. Don't let it weigh you down. It's too heavy to carry. If you're unforgiving, it'll lead you to depression, to more anger, to pain, to broken relationships that you're currently in. And so Joseph's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to put out evil with good. And so what was the outcome? Listen to the outcome here in verse 17. It says this. So when the servants, so now this is the brothers talking to Joseph now. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. If he would have taken his brothers out, which he could have, he would have never had closure in his life. He could have said, oh, that's my brothers. Hey, when they're far away, I want you to take them out. That's what they try to do to me. I want you to take them, throw them in prison. He could have, he's second most powerful man. He could have done whatever he wanted. But he said, I'm not God, so I'm not the one that's going to provide justice. I'm going to let God deal with it. I'm going to walk with the open hand of forgiveness. I'm going to let it go and let God deal with them in that situation. And where did it lead their heart? To say, we're so sorry. Please forgive us. We blew it. We blew it. Imagine the guilt that they had to live with their whole life up to this point. The guilt of, I can't believe we did this to our brother. That must have been eating at them. Not just that, but what about the lying that they had to do to their father? Because they had to come back and tell their father, buried him. I mean, like we don't know. He's gone. I mean, imagine, having to live with all that weight on their shoulders. And Joseph could have taken revenge. Instead, Joseph says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let God deal with that. So today, if you're struggling, and maybe it's just like Joseph. Joseph, as he was doing the right thing, he got knocked down. And maybe you've been working on doing the right thing. You're like, I'm trying to do the right thing, and you keep getting knocked down. Listen to this verse in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 19. And write this down because it's not in your notes. It says, so if you are suffering in a manner that pleases God, the actual term there is you're suffering in a manner that as you're living your life pleasing God, in God's will, God's purpose, keep on doing what is right and trust your lives to the God who created you, for he will never fail you. People will fail you, church. It says, but God will never fail you. And he says that if you're suffering for doing what is right, he says, don't give up. That's what Joseph did. He kept doing what is right. He says, you keep doing what is good. You trust God because he's not going to fail you. Now, you notice what our job is. It's to trust God, not to keep trying harder. I've had people tell me, like, I keep trying to forgive. I keep trying to do this. I keep trying. And it's like they're trying so hard to do this thing. But it didn't say try harder. It said trust God. See, oftentimes what happens is we get stuck in this life of unforgiveness and this life of trying to figure out how to do it all on our own. And it's like falling into quicksand. Listen, if you fall into quicksand and you try harder to get out, you're just sinking deeper and deeper. People tell you if you fall in quicksand, the most important thing is to stay still, stay calm, and have someone lift you out. That's what that verse said. It says, hey, God is saying, when all this happens, don't try harder on your own. Trust me. Be still, and I will pull you out. God begins that healing process in our heart and in our life. And he does that through a great relationship with him, but he also does that through a relationship within the church. Listen, we're God's people. We're here to support each other, to encourage each other, to lift each other up. This is why we tell you, make sure you're plugged into a connect group. Everyone should be in a connect group, which is our small groups. Everyone should be in it. If you're a Christian, you should be in a small group. I promise you, because the enemy is going to attack, he's going to knock you down. Whether it's things from the world, whether it's in other relationships, and you need to be around other people that are there to support you, to encourage you, and to lift you back up. So Joseph's life ended up, where he was the second most powerful man in the world. This guy just, again, changed the world. Literally saved the world. Because in his position, through the famine and through his organization, what took place, he literally saved so many lives. And he made Pharaoh very rich. And so through all that, God continued to bless him. But I want you to see that the whole reason was God wasn't just with him at the mountaintop. He was with him at every step of the way. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 2, it says this. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. If you read through Genesis chapter 37 through 41, you see that there were several times that it said in the text, and the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord was with Joseph. So God was with him every step of the way, helping him, strengthening him. But not only was the Lord with Joseph, but Joseph was with the Lord as well. That's the key. That's a relationship. It's not just about one doing it all. It's when you're in a relationship, you say, God, thank you for being there for me. Thank you for never leaving me, for never forsaking me, for never turning your back on me, for never failing me. And God, I just want to be strong and be focused on you. The reason that Joseph was able to move forward when people knocked him down is this, is because people knocked him down physically, but they never knocked him down spiritually. He was spiritually strong because his faith in God was solid. He didn't walk forward with the victim mindset. So many people get stuck in the victim mindset. But this happened to me, and this happened to me. Listen, every person can come up with a story. And I got to tell you, I'm not discounting what happened to you. We've all gone through some crazy stuff. There's a lot of abuse that have happened in our lives, and I understand, but listen, that mindset will keep us down. And he's like, look, I couldn't control what they did, but here's what I know. I have a God who can heal that. I have a God who can help me overcome that can help me take my next step and keep moving forward. Instead of being, this world focused, he was kingdom focused. He was focused on God. And not that he ignored the situation or the circumstance that he was in. Those were painful. And as we go through painful things in our life, please know this, that it's okay to admit they hurt. Here's what Joseph did. I'm hurt, but I'm not going to let it derail me, because my foundation isn't this world. My foundation is God. And one of the things that I love about Joseph as well, as people kept letting him down and hurting him, you notice the one thing he never did? He never blamed God. He knew it wasn't God. He knew God would never fail him, that God was right there with him, strengthening him, helping him. He knew that this was all people through their free will. How often do we go and we blame God for what other people have done in our life? And he never did. He's like, God, you didn't do this. If anything, you're the one that's helping me through it. Strengthen me through it. You're the one that's here. You're the only consistent in my life. And because he did that, not only did it impact his life, but it impacted the people around him as well. His life became a testimony. A testimony is just your life story, and how people will look at your life and they'll be drawn to God because of how you handle situations. Because I told you that the text said that the Lord was with Joseph and Joseph was with the Lord. But listen to what happened here in chapter 39, verse 3. Right after that text, it says this. Potiphar, who was an Egyptian officer, didn't have a relationship with God, in a pagan culture, said this. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. A guy who had nothing to do with God looks at his response and looks at what Joseph is doing, sees that even in the middle of the pit, God is doing something incredible in his life, and he says, and that is testimony. He literally impacted someone else's life because of how he responded. Church, the world's looking at how we as Christians respond. Faith, the way you know if you have strong faith is not what happens during the high moments, because anybody can go, yes, Jesus, during the moments when everything is good. The moments that we know our faith is strong is when we get hit and we get knocked down. And when we get back up, do we say, look, my whole world's rocked? Or we go, no. Physically we're hurt, but my foundation is in God. I'm on solid ground. And when we live that way, it'll change the world. It'll change the world. But it all starts by allowing God into our life. For a big chunk of my life, I couldn't forgive people. And honestly, I didn't want to forgive people. I felt like if I did, they're going to get away with it. But then I realized the reason I couldn't forgive them wasn't because I was an unforgiving person. The reason I couldn't forgive them was because I didn't understand forgiveness. And it wasn't until I was forgiven by God, until I said, God, I lay it all out there for you. Here's all the stuff I've done. And I realized that I am forgiven by God, that God sent Jesus to pay the price on the cross, to pay the price for my sin, for everything I've done wrong. And in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, it says there that God demonstrated his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That while I didn't deserve it, Jesus came and died for me. I'm like, what? That while we were enemies of God, God says, I love you anyway, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to win you back. Because you're my kid, and I created you to be loved by me. And when I finally received God's forgiveness, I then was able to learn how to be a conduit of that to other people. But it all starts with him. If you're here today, you're saying, hey, I'm ready. I don't want to be knocked down by the world and I'll let my life just be completely in shambles when the world knocks me down, but I want to have a strong foundation, and that only comes from God. I want to learn how to walk with an open hand of forgiveness so I don't carry the pain and the hurt from the past into my future relationships. And I know the pain that I've caused and the issues that I've done, but I'm ready to be forgiven of that. Today, you can do that. The Bible says you just got to confess with your mouth, believe in that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, and you shall be saved. So today can be the day. So let's just take a moment. Let's close your eyes, everyone. Let's bow your heads. And we're going to end in prayer. And if today, for the first time, if you're like, hey, I'm ready. I'm tired of carrying the weight of resentment and anger and hurt. And I just want God to lift it off my shoulders. If you're a Christian today, you can just give it to God and say, God, I'm not carrying any longer. You've already paid that price for me. God, just help me to heal now. And if you've never committed your life to Jesus, but you're ready to do today, just repeat after me. Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, help me heal from past pain. Thank you for forgiving me of my sin. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for freely giving it. Jesus, I believe that you died on the cross and you rose again on my behalf. I believe in you, I trust you, and I give you my life. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I love you so much, church. Have a great week.
Maybe you prayed that prayer for the first time today. Maybe that was you saying, God, I'm all in. Jesus, I'm all in. First, I want to let you know there's a party happening in heaven right now, rejoicing at the fact that you made that decision. But we would love to know about it. We'd love to come alongside you and talk to you about it, celebrate with you, and answer any questions that you might have. Pastor Juan will be in the back at the end of service, or you can feel free to come up and talk to any one of us at the end of service. The other option is maybe you're more comfortable in a little bit more of a private setting, and you can just text the word New Start to 520-251-9094, and that's all one word, NEWSTART, to 520-251-9094, and someone will reach out with you one-on-one during the week, just again to celebrate with you and to talk to you and answer any questions that you might have. Now, maybe you've prayed that prayer before, but you've not taken your next step, which is baptism, and you're ready to take that step today. We have the baptuzi all ready and warmed up, so if you would like to do that today, please, again, come and let us know, because we would love to be right there to celebrate that next step.